F1 on BBC Radio 5 Sports Extra.
We're in Melbourne, Australia for the third round of the 2024 Formula One World Championship, and Albert Park Circuit is the setting for this weekend's action. And we're getting ready down in the pit lane for the second practice session. There are blue skies here. It's about 20 degrees and it is blustery. We'll talk about how the wind may affect things in FP2 very shortly. I'm Rosanna Tennant down here in the pit lane, and joining me in the commentary box is our lead commentator Harry Benjamin and former McLaren F1 mechanic Mark Priestley. And guys, there were thrills and spills in the first practice session, and a little bit too much spill when it came to Alex Albon in the Williams. He will not take part in FP2 after a huge crash in FP1. His mechanics are working incredibly hard to get the car put back together. But Harry, it shows just how hard this track is to master. It can really bite, and it was biting back in FP1, wasn't it?
Yeah, and certainly in the case of Albon, coming through turn 7 and then pitched up onto the curb and then couldn't get control of the car, and that put him into the wall and strew carbon fibre across the right-hander of turn 8. Very similar to the crash he actually had in the race last year, which brought out the first of 3 red flags. He was the only one that found the wall in FP1, but Alonso, Bottas, Russell, Hamilton, Verstappen, Perez, all slipping and sliding out there. It was a bit of a scrappy session.
It really was. And was it the wind? Was it just getting to grips with this challenging temporary circuit? Mark, Lando Norris managed to get to grips with it. He finished fastest in FP1. But what do we read into that? Do we think McLaren can mix it with the likes of Ferrari and Red Bull this weekend? Or are Ferrari still just that little bit further ahead of the rest of the pack and just a little bit further behind Red Bull?
I'm glad you said just behind Red Bull. I thought you were going to suggest they were ahead of everybody for a second.
No.
That would be outrageous. I mean, look, we can read a small amount into the FP1 times. Not everybody's doing the same thing, and certainly not doing the same thing at the same times. What I would say about Lando Norris's performance is we kind of came to this circuit thinking this might be one that might just suit the characteristics of that McLaren car a little bit better than some of the others. It's those medium speed corners that seems to be a thing that they're really struggling with, whereas this circuit's quite high speed. It's got a lot of big stops and starts as well. So it's a kind of unique circuit, but it may just lend itself towards the McLaren. So only time will tell. FP1 was very much a learning session. More of that again in FP2, but the first one was so scrappy. I think hopefully this one will be a bit cleaner and we'll get a bit more focus towards that ultimate qualifying pace and then the race simulations a bit later on.
Yeah, track time is so critical on a track like this. And we've got some different tyres to what we had last year here in Australia. Pirelli bringing the softer tyres, the C3, 4 and C5. And that means we could see different strategies come race day. But it also means more work for the teams to do in these practice sessions. And Harry, that's critical, isn't it? Because you need to know what your plan is when it comes to a strategy on Sunday. Although we know the strategists are nimble and flexible beasts, it's still good to have done your homework, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and we saw homework being done, particularly on the soft compound of tyre in practice. A lot of the teams straight out and getting the running and the learnings on that. That's the C5 tyre. It's actually the least used of all the Pirelli tyres in the range in this current generation of car, and it's an unknown this year. Only Hamilton before practice 1 had done any kind of true long run pace performance on it back in testing for Bahrain, and very different track Bahrain, much more abrasive, so they would have gathered a lot of learnings from that. Traditionally Melbourne, 2-stop race, but depending on their learnings on the soft, and to see if anybody tries to figure out how the hard compound is going as well. And a reminder, the hard compound, they only get 2 sets of that, so it's going to be a real interesting balance of do they use one, trying to understand the learnings and get a better idea of the strategy for Sunday's race, or do they kind of leave it and go in blind for Sunday, but knowing that C3 hard compound tyre is the one that they're most used to, having used that throughout the last couple of years that Pirelli have supplied. So strategy could be quite interesting to watch for Sunday's race.
Definitely. Plenty of learnings coming our way. Carlos Sainz made it through FP1, of course, recovering from that appendicitis and subsequent surgery. He's back in the car now. I'm just watching him in the Ferrari car in the garage. We've got cars heading down to the end of the pit lane. During FP1, Mercedes were not doing too well. Their team principal, Toto Wolff, coming out to the front of the garage to have a little look. Consternation across his face. Can they pull it together for FP2? Whilst George Russell finished P3 in FP1, I'm not sure that tells the full picture. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. We'll get a bit of a better understanding in the next 60 minutes. Cars roaring down the pit lane. We've got a green light at the end. Cars on track. Let's get going. It's time for FP2, Harry.
Thank you very much, Rosanna. And yeah, whether it's Coulthard handing the win to Hakkinen, rookies getting podiums on debut or midfield scraps, Albert Park always throws up a spanner in the works somewhere along the line. One practice session done, and as we've been saying, scrappy session from almost the entirety of the field. Lando Norris, by the way, ended it fastest in front of Max Verstappen, Russell, Leclerc, and Yuki Tsunoda was actually in the top 5 in the RB. A great performance from him, only about half a tenth away from Norris's fastest lap time. But more learnings to be done, more rubber laid down on the track. There's a lot of support action in Albert Park as well, with Formula 3, Formula 2. We've got the Australian supercars. There's some Porsches going around as well. So that is all rubbering up the track nicely, and cars now heading out on track. Most of them on the medium compound of tyre. While they get up to speed with the track in FP2, as the crowd in their full grandstands enjoy some ice creams under the Melbourne sun. Air temperature 20 degrees Celsius, track temperature just under 38 degrees. This is how the championship standings look coming into this race weekend in the drivers. Well, 2 wins on the trot. Max Verstappen leads 51 points to his name, 15 clear of his teammate Sergio Perez. Red Bull getting 2 1-2s in the first 2 races. Then comes Leclerc, a further 8 points back. Russell, Piastri are the top 5 in the drivers championship. Over in the constructors, it's of course Red Bull who leads the way, 87 points to their name, 38 clear of Ferrari in second. Then come McLaren, Mercedes and Aston Martin the top 5. Haas getting off the board with 1 point thanks to Nico Hülkenberg's drive and a great team effort in Saudi Arabia. They are currently 6th. Then it's Williams, Sauber, RB and Alpine, the 10 teams that make up the Formula 1 World Championship. For those who want to do a sync up, it's 57 minutes and 51, 50, 49 seconds. And Mark Priestley, Sergio Perez is on a hot lap, his first of FP2. But the Red Bulls, both of them in FP1, didn't have it easy out there.
No, they didn't, but you know, this is kind of the pattern we've been seeing in the practice sessions in the first 2 races as well. You'd never look at those results from FP1 and FP2 and then look at the result in the race and say there was a clear matchup. I think what they're doing is, along with everybody else, learning about this circuit, learning about these tyres. These are a step softer than the tyres we brought last year, and the first practice session by almost everybody, but actually entirely by Red Bull and Ferrari, spent only on the soft compound tyre. This time out in the start of FP2, everybody out on the medium, and it's going to be learning and understanding how these cars react on this circuit with these tyres, with a view to both qualifying and the race. That's what this session is going to be all about. How does the car perform over one quick, fast lap when it's just about qualifying? And then how does it perform in a race stint, a longer stint? How does it look after its tyres? And what's the rate of degradation like? Because that is what's going to then formulate your strategy to play out over the rest of the weekend.
Speaking of Max Verstappen, he's out of his car at the moment. A lot of work being done to his Red Bull, which is up on its jacks, and the front wing completely off, and Verstappen just standing, arms folded, no helmet on at the back of his garage. So I'm sure we'll get an update as to what's going on there in a few moments' time. But we mentioned right at the start of the show that Alex Albon, who had that big crash in FP1 in his Williams, not taking part in FP2. Rosanna's outside Williams now.
And I cannot see very much, Harry. They've got the screens up. It's taking me back to F1 testing times. That's when the screens are normally up, when they've got reliability issues and we're not allowed to look in. But here we are, 3rd round of the season. Alex having an off in FP1, and the mechanics working incredibly hard to get his car put back together. We know he won't take part in this hour's session, not in FP2 today, hopefully back for FP3 tomorrow. I'm sure they'll be able to work their magic to get him back on track for Saturday, and of course the all-important qualifying. Disappointing for for Alex Albon because he's driving so well. So hopefully Williams can get him back in form for the rest of the weekend. And I'm going to head down to Red Bull to see what's going on with Max's car, because we didn't hear those messages, did we, that we're so used to hearing, the shifting problems for Max Verstappen. There wasn't any of that in FP1. He was slipping and sliding around out there on the track, but so many drivers were. But I'm going to go and see what the problem is and why it's up on its jacks with the front end not on.
Yeah, thanks, Rosanna. At least Williams has got the screens out this time and not just the people standing in front of you. So that's always nice. Thank you very much for that. We look forward to hearing the update to see what's going down at Red Bull. Everybody out on track with the exception of Max Verstappen, along with Lando Norris, Alex Albon, as we said, not taking part, Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari, and George Russell in the Mercedes, as Nico Hülkenberg actually comes in to the pits in his Haas as well. This is the sound of the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc, who ended FP1 in 4th, the 2022 race winner and pole sitter here, making his way now into the rundown towards the fast left-right chicane of turns 9 and 10. Lots of action there in FP1. Leclerc manages to negotiate it, doesn't run out too wide into the gravel trap that awaits you. 4 DRS zones around here. We've mentioned, Mark, that it's high-speed corners, and what I love about this track is it does punish the drivers. We've got the gravel traps there.
100%. I mean, how many years we've been crying out for that? We want more gravel traps, and this is kind of a little bit like the best of both worlds, isn't it? You've got a street circuit, which is exciting, the walls are very close, but there are other parts of the track where you do have grass to the outside. You've got gravel traps, and one of the big things we learned in FP1 is if you ride the curbs too much, if you get your outside wheels on the outside of a curb, meaning the bottom of the car, the plank, sits on those raised curbs, it lifts your wheels off the ground and you become a passenger. We saw lots of drivers falling foul of that earlier on.
We're just seeing a little replay of Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes going through turn 1, turns it in, and just has to get a kick on the rear end and correct it on the steering wheel. Not quite like in FP1 where couldn't even get it turned in, had to run across the grass. He still makes the corner, but in these early stages, Hamilton and that Mercedes just don't seem to be clicking. And the thing is, in the last couple of years, from the get-go, there have been sort of negative signs. Hamilton and Mercedes have openly said they weren't happy with the car. We go back to the zero-pod design. But they've been quite optimistic. Hamilton describing this car as not the evil sister of the previous, but yet clearly not all is well, particularly with Hamilton and that Mercedes car. Russell seems to be faring better.
Yeah, Russell definitely faring slightly better, although we did just see a very similar and almost identical snap actually from Russell in the sister Mercedes at the same part of the circuit. So they're clearly not happy, and I think the problem with Mercedes is they knew the problems that they had in the last 2 years. They'd gone down a sort of development path that had led them astray. They kind of got to the end of, midway through last year and decided, okay, this isn't working. We know that it's not working. We understand why. We are going to have to go down a different route and kind of follow the route that many other teams, including Red Bull, had gone. At that point, you've got some answers, so you know the direction you need to go. The problem for them now is this is year 1 with this philosophy on their car. Everybody else has evolved to this point. They've gone for 2 years of learning and understanding it and how to get the best out of it, maximising it. Mercedes are starting that process in these first few races, so it's perhaps understandable that they don't get it right first time, and certainly they don't learn how to get the most out of it in just 3 races, having just had 2.5 races or 2 races gone.
Yeah, well, as Russell comes out the final corner, DRS open, crosses the line, goes 4th fastest with a 1:19.5. Alonso currently fastest. It's an Aston Martin 1-2 with Lance Stroll in second, Oscar Piastri third, then Russell, then Perez at the top 5. The other Red Bull of Max Verstappen still in the garage. Last time we checked in, a lot of work being done to that Red Bull. Rosanna's got more.
Yeah, and that is because Max Verstappen damaged his floor in FP1, so the team have changed the floor between the sessions. So obviously just putting the last few finishing touches to his car. Meanwhile, his teammate Sergio Perez has just been in and is now out, heading back onto the track. So he's doing all the work at the moment. But I have to tell you guys, during the break, I was listening to Max Verstappen being interviewed by one of the local broadcasters here in Australia. And do you know what he was asked about? The dominance that he's been showing. Is he getting a bit tired of not being challenged? Damon Hill was actually asking the questions and said, are you missing being in the thick of the battle? And Max Verstappen said, why should I feel sorry for people that are slower than us? I just thought that was an epic line. And do you know what? He's got every right to feel like that, I guess.
Absolutely.
We were having such a good, in between the sessions as well, Rosanna, Mark and I were having such a good chat about Verstappen and the dominance with Red Bull, and how the number 2 driver, Sergio Perez, and in previous times the number 2, whether it's Alex Albon, Pierre Gasly, or even going back to sort of almost Vettel-Weber era, the number 2 driver is not a bad driver. Perez is not a bad driver.
No.
But he is made to look awful because of the gap between Max Verstappen. But if you took Verstappen out of that car, could anybody replicate that? You'd be quick, but would you be as dominant as he is?
I don't think so. And it's not just a reflection of driver talent, but it's the synergy that Max has with this car. The car has developed down a path to suit him, and his driving style is so in sync with it. A massive moment there for Charles Leclerc on the same curbs at the exit of turn 10. They are all getting very, very close to the limit there, aren't they? Just about recovers it. Max has grown up in Formula One with this car, with a Red Bull. It's sort of almost like an amazing pair of shoes that you put on, they mould around you.
The visibility is very poor. Let's get a dark tear off, please.
Yeah, Jose Jordan.
Perez saying the visibility very poor, wants a dark tear-off, please. So change the tear-offs on his visor to help with his visibility. Of course, they can change that depending on the sunlight, the cloud cover, whether it's a day or a night race. So Perez, expect him back in the pits.
He basically wants his sunglasses on, is what he's asking for there. So the answer to your question is, yes, somebody else. It's clearly the best car in Formula One right now. You put a great driver in it, they will do great things. But I think that would take time to get used to it, because we've seen a lot of good drivers step into that sister car and not be able to perform anywhere near the limits we know they're capable of. Perez gradually getting the hang of it, but he's nowhere near his teammate, even though they're both got the same car.
So, Rosanna, what do you think? If you stuck a Hamilton or Alonso in Verstappen's seat, would they be as dominant?
Oh, that's a tough one, because normally you say, would you stick them in the seat alongside Max Verstappen, and what would you see? I think they probably would be as dominant. You know what? I think those are the two that you'd like to see drive this RB20, wouldn't you? Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, those are the greats on the grid at the moment. But do you know what? Just go back to this interview that I watched. Damon Hill, still asking the questions at this point, had Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez sitting next to each other in the studio, and they were asking Sergio for information on what it was like being Max's teammate. He's the one who can see how Max really gets the most out of a car. He sees his data, and Max is just sitting there staring into the abyss. And then Damon Hill, the 96 world champion, he went there, he was like, and Sergio, it seems you've upped your game this year. You're being a good wingman, but obviously you want to win too. And I just thought, cripes, Damon Hill, you're a brave man. You're a brave man asking that question.
Yeah, he certainly is. Damon Hill out for blood there.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's right, isn't he? I mean, Perez has never won around this track. He's come second, and that's kind of the role he took on by accepting that Red Bull seat. The role of number 2, and it's a role we've seen time and time again in dominant teams in Formula One. You have the Rubens Barrichello, you have the Eddie Irvine, you have more of them not with the Ferrari team, but you have the Felipe Massa, or even you have the Valtteri Bottas, and Sergio Perez has taken on that role. But the gap, although he's finishing second, the gap has been so large every time that if the Red Bull car wasn't so dominant, as there's a spin for Logan Sargent, the sole remaining Williams in this practice session. He's been through the gravel. There's some gravel strewn on the rear, and this is coming through turn 11. So I wonder if he's gone in deep in the final sector and had a little moment in the gravel. We'll get another look at it as the team ready for Sargent to be back into the pits, the American driver in his second season. But look, before, in previous times, you had two drivers like let's say a Bottas and Hamilton were fairly close. Hamilton always had the edge more often than not, whereas the gap is quite large consistently between Perez and Verstappen, but they don't need to worry about that at the moment.
No, and it's a luxury that they've created for themselves. I mean, we take nothing away from Red Bull in any of this. They have done the best job, and it's really up to everyone else to catch up. And there's my view on the dominance at the moment. But they've created themselves this luxurious position where they can afford to have that. Particularly this season, Perez is doing exactly what they need to do. He's finishing second behind Max, albeit with a huge gap. But, that's what the team need. And Look, I have this viewpoint on second drivers, if that's what we want to call them. You mentioned a few. Let's hear from Sargent.
Touch the gravel.
Yeah, okay, we'll just pick up.
Yeah, Sargent touched the gravel coming through the right-hander of turn 11, went a little bit deep and kicked up with the rear left, and round he went, just avoided the wall, but a big intake of breath from the Williams garage. Already one car with a lot of damage. They don't have a spare chassis at Williams, so they're assessing the damage on Albon's car. They don't need two cars in the walls either. Every weekend is crucial for a team like that.
They don't, and he's just dragged gravel all across the circuit on the exit of that corner too. But you mentioned a few Ferrari setups over the past where they had dominant driver, or a clear number one and a clear number two. A lot of people criticise that. I mean, I've even had the opinion that's not how you should go racing, but actually when you think about it, it worked out for Ferrari for many, many years, putting your efforts and your focus on one driver who you think's got the best opportunity, the other guy's there to bring up the rear and to defend and to pick up points. I've been in a situation at McLaren where we've had two very good drivers. It's a notorious year. 2007 is the one that stands out. Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso. When you've got two drivers in a very strong car going for the world title, something they've dreamt of since they were kids, and the only guy standing in your way from getting it is the guy on the other side of the garage, they suddenly go from being your teammate to your worst enemy, and that will provide all sorts of problems for a team. If Red Bull had another driver of equal caliber to Max, I guarantee you they will have those sorts of political and personnel type dramas going on, and no team needs that or wants it.
But we want it.
Of course we do, yeah.
But you're absolutely right. But as a driver as well, you've got to suddenly get your head around that mindset. You get your chance. And for Perez in particular, it was almost a win-win for him, surely, because he was facing being out of the sport at the end of 2020, right? He didn't have any other options left. So when Red Bull come calling and go, yeah, do you want to be basically the number two? You'll probably get some more silverware. You take it and a nice paycheck.
Of course you do. And I don't even know that that's what they would have offered to him as come along to be the number two. I wonder if back then it was a case of, can anyone actually get anywhere near Max? They needed at that point someone to be closer to Max. That's why they put him in there, because other drivers had come in and not been able to do it. As we said earlier, they've got a luxury at the moment. They can afford to have one driver quite some way behind, but that won't be the case forever. And there'll be future seasons where they need a driver to win the race and they need someone else in a close battle to still be coming second.
Well, at the moment, Perez is fourth, and Verstappen, with damage picked up to the floor of his Red Bull in practice one, still in the garage with repairs being made. No Alex Albon either, after big damage to his Williams in a big crash in FP1-2. Charles Leclerc, who is currently fastest. Everybody out there on the medium compound tyre, bar Fernando Alonso, who's on the soft. Leclerc's fastest time, a 1:17.9. Then it's Norris, Sainz, Perez, Russell, the top five. Alonso, Hamilton, Gasly, Stroll, Piastri, the top 10. Ocon, Sargent, Tsunoda, Ricciardo, Magnussen, the top 15. Bottas, Joe, Hülkenberg, Verstappen and Albon, the last two. Verstappen and Albon, as I mentioned, not in this at the moment. Verstappen hoping to get out imminently. But Hülkenberg 18th and last of the classified drivers who have set a lap time so far. 42 minutes remain.
As you said, everybody on the medium tyre right now, this is definitely going to be, or almost certainly going to be, one of the preferred race tyres. This is typically a two-stop race, but we have seen people go almost, in fact, Alex Albon went almost the entire race distance on the hard tyre with a very late pit stop, as it was in that particular incident. So there are situations where you can throw a bit of a dice in strategy here and do something a little bit different. As you pointed out earlier, no one's got hard tyres in abundance, only two sets. We've just seen the first car, Fernando Alonso, go onto the soft tyre as they start their qualifying runs. I think they're going to be a real toss-up between this soft tyre, which is new for this race, a step softer than we had last year, and the medium tyre as the ones that everybody's going to be looking at for performance, but crucially how quickly they degrade. And we're about to see the first lap being done on the soft tyre in earnest here with Fernando Alonso. Yeah,
Alonso comes into the right-hander of turn 4, which feeds you immediately into the left-hander of turn 5, running a little bit wide on the exit curb, makes his way into the run down of the right-hander, where Albon and his big crash, and Alonso gets a little bit squirrely on the exit, but carries through the speed round the long arcing right-hander of turn 8 and down towards the quick chicane, left, right of turns 9 and 10 with the DRS rear wing open. Let's just see Alonso through this chicane. He found the gravel there earlier, doesn't find it this time around and gets through it, puts the DRS back on, losing a little bit of time though in that middle sector. Head down to you, Rosanna, now.
And Max Verstappen is in his Red Bull car finally. The front wing's just been put back on. The tyres have been put back on. The car was fired up, then turned off. And then I think they realised they needed to screw his headrest in. So now he's getting all ready to head out. Steering wheel's being put on. And now with 20 minutes of the session done, finally we might see the three-time world champion. But perhaps that's the disadvantage he needs to level himself with the rest of the field. Maybe a third of the practice session in the garage and 2/3 out on track. Maybe that'll bring everyone closer together.
Well, you laugh. Is this the first time something's kind of gone against Verstappen in a race weekend?
Oh, but it's a damaged floor.
Yeah,
but it's not his fault.
No.
Well,
That's what I'm saying.
He ran over the curb.
Well, but we've spoken time and time again about how he doesn't get affected. Like this rain conditions didn't affect him in Zandvoort last year. He still came through. Here's Russell on the radio.
Ferrari's going dangerously slow up the straight. Sainz, blind corner.
Russell complaining about Sainz driving slowly through in the run down towards the chicane at turn 9 and 10. Seemed like there was plenty of room, and as he does that, Stroll makes his way through the chicane and fancies a little bit of off-road rallying and kicks up the dirt and the grass, nearly loses the rear end, and a bird gets a grade A view of it as well. Stroll avoids the bird and avoids spinning, crosses the line, goes 9th fastest, stays 9th fastest, lost a lot of time in that final corner. But we were saying about Verstappen how things just don't seem to go against him ever, and you know this is a little something that's cost him some track time.
It has cost him track time. It's obviously he'll recover from this, absolutely no problem. But what we were saying about that was that where he damaged his floor was exactly the same place that Alex Albon went off the curb and over the curb.
Yeah, messed up the last corner. Yeah, no drama, mate.
That was Lance Stroll just explaining his little off-track excursion. But you know, the difference being that for Max Verstappen, the world champion, where everything seems to go right, when he went off, he just had a bit of a moment, and yes, he's damaged his floor. Poor old Alex Albon had the similar moment, but ended up in the wall and missing the entire session. So perhaps there's your difference.
Well, we'll see what he's got when he heads back out onto the track. 38 minutes remain as teammate Sergio Perez is coming round the final corner now. Perez, who is on and put on the soft compound of tyre, the fastest rubber, goes 4th fastest. It's Leclerc, Alonso, Norris and Perez with Sainz in the top 5.
I've got to say, the first couple of soft tyre runs have been disappointing.
Not magical, are they?
Both Aston Martins messed up their laps. Alonso had a moment in the middle sector, which was slower than he went around the middle sector of the medium tyres. First sector was very quick, as it was for Stroll, who then ruined the end of his lap. But that's the first one there. Sergio Perez on that soft tyre, still nearly 3/10 of what Leclerc was able to do on the medium. That's got to be disappointing, where you'd always expect that softer tyre to deliver probably 3 or 4 tenths at least over the medium tyre in outright performance. These are their qualifying runs just starting now. This is the best indication of an actual outright pecking order we're going to get.
Well, as Perez then crossed the line on that soft tyre run, just under 3/10 slower than Charles Leclerc, who is currently fastest. But let's get an update on Perez's teammate, Max Verstappen. Rosanna.
Max is out. He has left the garage. He's headed out on track. They've obviously fixed the floor and are happy with how the car is looking. He's out there now, so now we're going to get a little bit more of a feel for what he is going to be capable of this weekend in that RB20. He's just got to stay off those curbs, though. Perhaps that was his little moment of the weekend, and he'll get it all back on track and get it sorted and get back to his normal weekend ways, and maybe some complaining about upshifting or downshifting, who knows, but for the time being he's out on track.
Yeah, he is. Thanks, Rosanna. As you were talking, Alonso has gone fastest in the Aston Martin, put a clean lap together. 24 thousandths of a second clear of Charles Leclerc now. Norris Perez signs the top 5, but as you say, Mark, some soft tyres going on, and these are their quali laps that they are practicing. Ricciardo on a lap at the moment, and we talk about drivers under pressure, particularly in the Red Bull fold. Daniel Ricciardo coming into this season, the Australian now, he didn't actually get his home race last year, did he? He came too late into the season, so first race in Melbourne for a couple of years. He's half a second down on Alonso in the middle sector. And at the moment, Ricciardo, in comparison to his teammate, Yuki Tsunoda, who many have not even counted to be in the running for the second Red Bull seat, he's behind him. He's slower.
Yeah, which is obviously the first measure of performance for any driver, isn't it? How do you compare to your teammate in the same car? And Daniel has to do better. I mean, I don't want to put drivers under any more pressure than they're already under, but that's the reality of this sport. He's being judged on his performances, first of all, against his teammate. If he wants any hope of moving up that Red Bull ladder towards the top to get a shot in one of the best cars of Formula One history, he needs to do way better in the RB that he's in right now. One thing I want to say about this session and what we're seeing over the first couple of sessions so far, this is a session on a racetrack where we're seeing lots of driver mistakes, lots of tiniest little errors that are costing drivers. I think that's brilliant for Formula One. I think it's brilliant from a viewer perspective. When it gets to qualifying, which is what teams are starting to simulate now, it's all out. You're on the limit all the way through the racetrack for the entire lap. So whoever makes fewest mistakes might end up coming out on top here.
Mention a mistake. Max Verstappen just locked up going into the left-hander at turn 13. Also a bit of traffic to his inside as well. I think it was Bottas or Magnussen, and really had to bail out of that one and ruined the end of that lap. Verstappen, though, across the line, does finally get a lap time on the board. 19th fastest. Is out there on the medium compound of tyre. It's actually Lance Stroll who's fastest at the moment, the Aston Martin. And you know what? The Aston Martin's actually been quite quick since the get-go. It's been a bit scrappy, but both of them, Alonso and Stroll, and you know it's an indicator when Stroll is also kind of there or thereabouts with Alonso. Aston seem to be finding their feet a little bit. We know they're good over one lap pace anyway. It's the race pace that is worrying them a little bit, but they've got much improved DRS efficiency this year, according to the team. And at a track like this, where there are now 4 DRS zones, perhaps that's weighing in their favour?
Yeah, I think they have done well, particularly on Saturday. They have shown signs of pace. I'm going to take what we're seeing at the moment with a slight pinch of salt, because they are at the moment top of the timesheets, but a fraction, just a couple of thousandths really, ahead of Charles Leclerc, who's still on the medium tyre. We haven't yet seen anyone really of the top runners deliver a clean lap on the soft compound tyre, the fastest of the compounds we have. I want to see Charles Leclerc get on that red-walled soft compound tyre. I want to see Max Verstappen deliver a clear lap without locking up the brakes, which he did last time. And when we see that, then we'll get a real picture of where everybody really sits as we head into the rest of the weekend, when it really starts to matter. But not to take anything away from people like Aston Martin, they have made a step improvement in their car, and that's good to see.
Magnussen in the Haas, the latest victim of the gravel on the exits of the turn 10 chicane. He powers on through, keeps it pointing in a straight line. The Dane down in 18th at the moment, ahead of Verstappen, who is out there at the moment on another lap. 19 drivers taking part in this second practice. We are missing one in the form of Alex Albon in the Williams after his big crash in FP1. Williams said he will not be participating in this session, and we can get an update with Rosanna now.
Yeah, still no sign of that Williams. He's not going to be participating in FP2, as you say, Harry, and that's because the team are assessing the damage. Now, the problem is, if they assess the damage and see that the chassis is broken or damaged on Alex's car, then there is no spare third chassis here in Melbourne, Australia. So what would that mean? Would it mean that Alex wouldn't take part in the rest of the weekend? Would it mean they switched and put Alex in Logan's car because he perhaps could be the driver that could get the best out of the weekend? That's all conjecture at the moment. They are still assessing the damage. And Mark, you'll be able to tell us how you assess that damage out on event as such, because you're not in the factory, you haven't got all the equipment. But what will the mechanics and team be doing to make sure that if they do send Alex out, or can send Alex out, there's no internal damage to that chassis?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you're doing is visual checks, of course. You're looking for obvious signs of damage, but there are tools and pieces of equipment that they can use, ultrasonic testers that can effectively look inside the carbon fibre structure for fractures and fault lines, signs that might be a weakness. Don't forget that chassis is the driver's safety cell. It's the bit that everything's bolted to, but it's also the bit that keeps the driver safe in the event of an impact. You simply cannot take any risks, and nobody would ever do such a thing and send the driver out in a damaged chassis. However, it does depend on how bad any damage might be, because if it's external, if it's superficial, it can be repaired, it can be patched up, and as long as structurally the tub or the chassis is fine, then we'll see Alex back out in that again, I'm sure, by the time we get going again tomorrow. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, and as I say, Williams working hard to assess the damage. We don't know the extent of the damage at the moment. That would be the situation if there were to be damage to the chassis. But if there's a team that can work hard on fix things, it is, of course, the Williams team. So screens up at the moment, trying to assess the damage and hopefully fix the damage on Alex Albon's car to get him ready for FP3 tomorrow. And, of course, the all-important qualifying session ahead of the race on Sunday.
And his 28th birthday for Alex Albon, so he'll very much be wanting to get out on track, I'm sure. Logan Sargent, his teammate, currently 9th fastest in a Sauber sandwich with Joe ahead of him and Bottas behind. Well, Mark, you wanted to see what Leclerc and Norris have got on a set of softs. We're about to see it. Leclerc in the first sector at the moment. This is the sound of Norris coming across the line. Lost time in the last two sectors, actually. About 3/10 off Stroll's fastest lap time. He's at 6th fastest is Norris. Leclerc, fastest of anybody in the first sector. Lost a little bit of time compared to Stroll in the middle sector as he comes through the right-hander of turn 11 now. Verstappen gets his first proper lap on the board. He's on the mediums. Verstappen goes 8th fastest, but Leclerc, Sainz and Russell all on that soft compounder tyre at the moment. Leclerc coming around the final corner now, gets oh so close to the exit wall, but judges it perfectly. The DRS flies open and Leclerc goes fastest. 1:17.423, 4/10 clear of Lance Stroll.
Yeah, so that was a decent lap from Charles Leclerc. The middle sector, still a lot of time left on the table. That was even slower than he went round on the mediums in the middle sector, but that seems to be a bit of a trend that a few people are following, so there's still time to be had, and I'm sure people like Verstappen will be able to maximise that. Interestingly, Sergio Perez, a really disappointing lap from him on the soft tyres. I didn't see any obvious problems. We saw a lot of it on board. Didn't see anything that obviously lost him time, but he's currently sitting 7th. He's 6.5 off what Leclerc was able to do. So there's definitely still work to do at Red Bull and for a number of other teams to get this right. They're looking for a car that's compliant and that can be a little bit able to take some of these moments that they're all seeming to have. There's Max Verstappen.
That's Verstappen on the radio as he came into the braking zone of turn 4. He found a Sauber of Zhou Guanyu.
Yeah, I'm too late, bro.
And that was Joe Radio confirming that he was a little bit in the way of Verstappen there, who felt the wake of that Sauber in front of him. But it is practice. He can get away with it.
It's also yet another flying lap for Verstappen ruined. And you know, you, not only do you run out of time, but you run out of brand new tyres where all the performance is. You start to run out of those as the clock ticks down. I mean, look, it's not going to really ruin the rest of Verstappen or Red Bull's weekend, but it is frustrating and annoying.
Russell went 4th fastest a moment ago as well on the soft compound of tyre. Hamilton's out there as well. He is also on the soft. He's down in 16th at the moment. He was on a quick lap, but I wonder if he bailed out of it at the end of it. We'll see, because he's down in 16th at the moment. Tsunoda in the RB is out there. He was looking quick from the get-go. It's the first time he's stuck on the soft compounder tyres. A really interesting dynamic developing between Tsunoda, that RB, and his teammate Daniel Ricciardo. Very much a story worth keeping an eye on. Runs a little bit deep coming through the exit of turn 11. Doesn't put dip a wheel into the gravel too much. And then the tricky left-hander of turn 13. And then keeping it all neat and tidy. The pit lane entry to your right as you curve round to the right, out the final corner, and Tsunoda losing a lot of time in that final sector. 17th fastest for him on his first attempt, so I wonder if his going deep in turn 11 cost him a bit too much time on that occasion. Verstappen out there again, this time, hoping for a clean lap. He's only got a couple of corners left on that medium compounded tyre.
Well, it's actually the same lap that he had to avoid Tsunoda on, so I suspect in terms of lap time he's already compromised himself. He's still on the medium tyre, as you say, so I think he's getting a lap or two in the bank. That puts him 6th fastest as he crosses the line. I don't think that's anywhere near the potential that Max has with this car. He will probably peel into the pits at the end of this one and stick the soft tyres on so he can get that qualifying run done before they then switch to race prep runs, longer stints on different compounds of tyre towards the end of this session. There's a very clear plan for every team and every driver about what they need to learn, what they need to figure out. Any of these little mistakes, people getting in the way, little running wide, as we've seen Lewis Hamilton just do there, any of these things just compromise your run plan. You have to just back off and effectively you're never going to learn quite as much as if it was going perfectly.
Yeah, going wide on the exit of turn 10 was the reason for Hamilton's poor pace on his first soft tyre run. Absolutely clattering the curves there, but I'm kind of here for this.
It's great, isn't it?
This is a struggle.
It's great.
And the drivers are working hard. The walls are close, but they're not so close. It's a sort of kind of hybrid street track. You've got gravel, you've got a bit of grass, you've got that leeway, but you are punished. And at the same time, you've got 4 DRS zones, slightly curved straights, 19 cars out on track. So you're having to navigate the track positioning quite well. This is setting up to going to be a really exciting qualifying session nonetheless, let alone the race.
Well, it's great because this is practice. They're at 98% right now. They're trying to sort of find those limits and trying to find out how the car's going to work, but they're not at 100%. When they go to qualifying, that's exactly where they need to be at 100%. They're on the limit, right, dancing with the edge of that limit. And if we're seeing these kind of mistakes happening right now, I can see this happening all over again in qualifying. And like you say, I'm here for that too. It's great.
Let's check in on some of our home heroes. Oscar Piastri currently down in 7th at the moment in the McLaren. Daniel Ricciardo in 11th, and the honorary Australian Valtteri Bottas down in 13th. And actually, speak of Bottas and Joe as well as teammate in 10th, Sauber have not really had the start of the year that they were hoping for. They're in a bit of a transitional phase when they become Audi in 2026. Both Joe and Bottas out of contract at the end of this year. Bottas, while he's really coming into his own personality-wise in the off-track actions, I'm sure we've all seen the advert that he did in the build-up to this weekend.
Genius.
Being the BBC, we won't name the advert, but I'm sure you can find it. But that Bottas, just in terms of performance, it seems to have dipped away slightly, and compound that with actually the team performance and 2 races on the trot with pit stop issues, with wheel nut pit stop issues, the same issues. There's a lot of problems that need to be ironed out in that Sauber team.
Yeah, it's really frustrating, and particularly, like you say, when they're on the brink of this transition to becoming a full works team, fully owned by Audi, as they will be by that point. If you're Valtteri Bottas, you've sort of got half an eye on that, thinking, well, I want to be here for that. I want that opportunity to go back into a full works outfit and see what they can bring to the party. But to do that, to give himself that shot, I mean, that's going to be a prime seat in Formula One, albeit a new team. There's going to be big budgets behind it, experience and expertise. You want to be there working for a manufacturer. He's got to start improving his on-track. The team itself, though, as you rightly say, all sorts of issues. The pit stops are something that's really frustrating. They've had issues with wheel nuts kind of cross-threading. I think they have brought some new parts in terms of those wheel nuts and the adapters that go on the end of the gun to try and fix it. But I don't think even the team are 100% convinced yet that it's fully fixed. You won't really find it out until you get into the next race situation where everything's glowing hot and you go through the pressurised situation of a live pit stop.
Yeah, well, a striking livery, but not so striking in terms of performance right now, Rosanna.
And they've brought upgrades here, hoping to improve their single lap pace. And Mark, you're right. I don't think that wheel nut issue is solved. I think the pit stops are going to be a hairy moment for the team this weekend. I was talking to their team representative, team principal, if you like, Alessandro Aluni-Bravi yesterday, and he was saying that it takes so long because they have to hand make and machine make, of course, but right from scratch, these new wheel nuts. They tried to improve things in the winter break to make their pit stops better. The last 2 races have proved they haven't got it right. It's going to take some time for them to really fix that. And people might think, oh, it's just a pit stop, a few seconds here or there, that it might take longer. But if there's a risk of something going really wrong in a pit stop, that could be throwing away a point, 2 points, which could be critical when it comes to the constructors' standings at the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, coming into this weekend, I was told that Sauber are only 95% confidence in their pit stops this weekend. And that's high, but it's not enough in Formula One, is it?
It's not enough. You have to go into these things with as close to 100% confidence in everything, from safety to performance to pit stops, the whole thing, to the people in your team, everything. And I've got to say, it's almost an unforgivable error for a Formula One team. These are the best in the business, and I hate criticising teams because it's never as easy as things look from the outside. But to come into a season, this is not a new team. These are very experienced guys. They have had problems before. To come in and know that your wheel nuts are just cross-threading, they're not working properly, they're not able, they're not fit for purpose, essentially, is what the answer to that question is. That's not good enough for someone who's the best in the business. And I think they've got to look long and hard at that, because that's a fairly simple and fairly basic error, but a very, very costly one.
Coming back to the transition to Audi in 2026, can you see a Bottas or a Zhou being a part of that lineup?
I actually thought a Bottas would be a really natural progression, a transition. Keep hold of him. There's a bit of continuity from the team side of things. He's got great experience. He's a race winner. You know, having been at Mercedes for those dominant years, he brings a lot to any team in terms of that experience. He knows what a team that wins looks like, and that's valuable, particularly when you're coming in fresh, as Audi will be. But as I said before, ultimately that experience is all great, but you've also got to have performance to match, and at the moment that's struggling. Of course it's hard to perform when you've got a car that's inconsistent and not working or behaving the way it should, but as we've been saying all along, like Daniel Ricciardo, your first point of reference is your teammate, and that's not been a clear-cut 1-2 situation at the moment either.
We have a great chat about this and more in our preview show, which you can check out, the Checkered Flag podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Myself, the former Formula One driver Jolyon Palmer, and F1 journalist Rebecca Clancy, along with Jenny Gao as well. Great debate about what Audi might be able to achieve when they come into the sport. The fact that they're able to chuck so much money at it right now while they're outside of the cost cap restrictions. So if you want to get a bit more of a deeper dive into that throughout the rest of your day, while you're trying to stay awake in time for FP3, do go and check that out. 19 minutes remain of this free practice one session. Leclerc and Sainz are the fastest, with Stroll, Alonso and Russell the top five. Then comes Verstappen, who's on a lap at the moment, coming through the middle sector, and Verstappen has now bolted on the soft compound of tyre. Then comes Piastri, Perez, Norris, Tsunoda the top 10. Tsunoda's just radioed in asking his team to check the floor. Lots of drivers running out wide onto the gravel, onto the curbing here, and including Verstappen was delayed to start this session with the team having to repair his floor. He's now coming out round the final corner, DRS open, down the main straight, up through the gears and across the line. Third fastest for Max Verstappen, a 1:17.7, exactly the same lap time as Carlos Sainz, dead on, a 1:17.707 each. But because Sainz said it first, he's second, and they're just over 4/10 back from Leclerc.
So not entirely comfortable at Red Bull on this track, certainly over one lap pace. It's not something we haven't seen before. Ferrari, the class leaders at the moment, sitting first and second. Leclerc tops the timesheet, Sainz second. I think that's a picture we've began to get used to over the first few races. On a Saturday in qualifying, that Ferrari has blistering pace. And I know that Red Bull and Max Verstappen have stuck it on pole, but it's not all been plain sailing. It's been a real tight battle when it comes to the one lap pace. It's the Sunday that the Red Bull has the clear advantage in able to look after its tyres. This is a circuit that does not have particularly high degradation typically on the tyres. So if you're Ferrari and you can get it in front on Saturday, if you can take the front row, that puts them in probably the best position they've been in so far this season, with a chance to really threaten the Red Bull dominance, I'd say, for the first time. We're very early days yet, and I'm sure there's more in Max Verstappen and that Red Bull, but early signs at least showing that Ferrari are definitely in the mix here.
Dangling the carrot very nicely. But I think that was his first lap on the soft, so we'll see what he comes back with second time around. He's currently just coming into the final sector now, so we'll see what he does if he's gearing up for another flyer. But it's the two Ferraris who currently lead the way, and Sainz about 4/10 of his teammate as well. Of course, Sainz coming back after missing the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix due to having appendicitis. He's had the surgery and he is back, and and after FP1 it feels good to carry on. So back in for FP2, the stand-in from Saudi, Oliver Bearman, is here this weekend on standby for Ferrari, but also racing in Formula 2. Verstappen decides to come into the pits at the end of that lap, so we won't get to see what a follow-up lap would do. Then it's Stroll, who is in 4th, Alonso the top 5, Russell, Piastri, Perez, Norris, Tsunoda the top 10, Joe, Ricciardo, Sargent, Bottas, Gasly the top 15, Hülkenberg, Ocon, Hamilton, Magnussen, the 19 drivers taking part in this session. No Alex Albon in the Williams after his big crash in free practice 1. The team assessing the damage currently to his chassis. They do not have a spare chassis, so crunch time down at Williams will keep you abreast of all of that information, and Sargent giving them something to worry about as well early doors in this session by having a spin. And this is the sound of Sargent getting a bit of slipstream on the Haas and turning in and racing and getting shown the exit. Has to then cut across the grass and trying to get racing, but it is only free practice 2.
I think he was hoping, it was a Haas, wasn't it, that he was trying to get past. I think he was hoping the Haas would literally back out of the whole situation and let him turn in, but he didn't really.
I think the Haas's have been a bit of a surprise package in terms of the field, the midfield back, let's be honest, because if the top 5 teams have 2 drivers who stay in the race to the end, they are your top 10. Those are your point scorers. Haas stealing a point in Saudi was a great display of their pace, but also their strategic minds.
They really did steal that
and
point
the teamwork. Well, how do you feel about this teamwork? Kevin Magnussen's race, well, he sacrificed himself really with the 2 10-second time penalties, but then he did an absolutely magnificent job of driving to a delta to keep the entire rest of the field behind him. Tsunoda, Albon, Ocon, Bottas, Ricciardo, all behind him, and giving the gap for Hülkenberg to pit and come out back into the points. A couple of teams complained about it though. Unsportsmanlike?
No. If you want to complain at the rules, because every single Formula 1 team will max out whatever's within the rules to give them the best result possible, and they'll do that from a technical perspective with their cars, they'll do it from a sporting perspective as well, and that's exactly what happened. Yes, I can see why fans might look at it and go, well, that was a bit dull, it was a bit frustrating. I can see why other teams might think the same thing, and I get all of that. But if you want to complain about the regulations that allow that to happen. Certainly don't complain at the team or the driver, because they were maxing out within the parameters that Formula 1 gives them to race within. That's what I've done for years in this sport. That's what every team does. You look for loopholes, you look for opportunities, and then you execute to the best of their ability. And in that particular strategy, they executed it seamlessly.
Hülkenberg said they need these unorthodox strategies to be able to score the points when they become available, because it is so tight in that midfield scrap that when a Lance Stroll or whoever it might be doesn't finish a race, the way Formula 1 is right now, you're not getting those big results for 6th place or 5th place. It is really the scrap over 10th.
And it makes such a difference to a team like that, both financially, but also, as you said, with the top 5 teams more or less locked on for those points in most normal situations. That means that the bottom 5 teams, 1 point could catapult you all the way up from last up to 6th, or beyond. So these things matter to a team like that, so you can't really blame them for going for it.
Yeah, and Haas winning that battle for the time being, 6th in front of Williams, then Sauber, then RB, and then Alpine, who have had a bit of a disastrous start to the season. Lots of technical changes going on there, and they changed everything bar the steering wheel in this new Alpine at the start of the season, but were the slowest car in the first 2 rounds. So far, been showing a little bit better this weekend. Gasly currently 15th, Ocon 17th, but the order still up in the air. Verstappen has come back out and set another lap on the soft compound of tyre, and he's now gone 2nd fastest, just under 4/10 still, back from Charles Leclerc, who is still fastest with a 1:17.2. Then comes Verstappen, then it's Sainz, Stroll, Alonso the top 5, Russell, Piastri, Perez, Norris, Tsunoda the top 10, Joe, Ricciardo, Sargent, Bottas, Gasly the top 15, Hülkenberg, Ocon, Hamilton and Magnussen, the 19 drivers in this practice session. No Albon, we hope to see him in FP3 tomorrow. Just over 11 and a half minutes remain.
So I think this is interesting to some extent, and there were all in all caveats about it being Friday and practice sessions and how it's not the overall picture. But Verstappen's not happy, and I'm saying that not just based on the lap time, but through watching some of his laps. Both him and Perez struggling and fighting with that car, which is not something we're particularly used to seeing. Even if they're lacking in pace, they make some changes, they tend to iron it out before the session's finished. They're still fighting with things. They're on the absolute ragged edge and struggling to some extent. Now, I don't want to put false hope in anyone's minds. I think by Sunday they will still be the class of this field. But I genuinely think that on Saturday, because we're now all moving into race runs now, everybody now switching to the medium tyre. The lap times I don't think are going to change much for most people now in terms of the outright lap time. This next section of this, the last 10 minutes of this session, are going to be about who looks best over the longer runs. And we'll see that picture develop once the numbers have been crunched a bit later on. I suspect when we get to that part of the weekend, we'll start to see it coming back towards Red Bull, back towards Verstappen, and this more normal picture. But Saturday, qualifying, that could really shape the weekend here, perhaps more than any other race we've had so far.
Well, we wait to see. So far, a lot of curiosity around Mercedes and their struggles, particularly in high-speed corners. Lewis Hamilton seemingly struggling a little bit more than his teammate George Russell. He's currently down in 18th. I think he's just come out back out onto the track. Rosanna, have you got any more info?
Yeah, he's not happy, you're right, Harry. Not happy with the balance of the car, and I think the team think they've potentially gone the wrong way on setup changes between the sessions, and we've seen this, haven't we? Lewis sometimes going in one direction, George going in another. Sometimes Lewis favouring setting up the car ready for race day rather than quali trim. So we're going to have to see what the team say after the session once they've dug into the data. And also, Lewis didn't get the first the push laps on the soft, so he sort of lost the best of that particular tyre. So you'd hope more to come with him languishing down in P18, but if he's not happy with the car, who knows? This might be a really difficult weekend for the Silver Arrows. Coming into the weekend, I think we all said it would be, given this is a high-speed circuit, and that was what Lewis Hamilton was complaining about in Jeddah, that they really needed to do some work in the high-speed sections. Have they done enough? It hasn't been long since the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, but we know these teams work fast.
They do, but this again is another weekend, and I'm going back to last year as well, where Mercedes are saying might have gone the wrong way with setup, we're going to go a different way, going to try that way, one driver's going to do this, one driver's going to do that, and again, doesn't this just showcase a team that is just completely lost?
I think lost is exactly the word that I would use, and we know they've got lost over the last, even they've accepted they got lost in terms of the direction they've gone with the development of the car over the last couple of years, but now they're kind of lost in a slightly different way. They've gone a completely different direction, they've sort of followed suit with everybody else, completely redesigned their car. Now they're lost in the sense that, you know, we are 2 races into a season with a brand new package, brand new concept. They have almost no data on it. They have no understanding of it. They are lost, but as I said earlier on, they're kind of lost in the way that most other people were 2 years ago. They're now a long way down this path with this particular development philosophy. Mercedes are kind of starting from scratch, so they're going to be lost for a little while. Unfortunately, if you're a Mercedes fan, if you're a Mercedes driver or anyone associated with that team, it just feels like more of the same again, which is really frustrating.
Well, Hamilton is now back out on track. He's on the medium compounded tyre, just coming through the left-hander turn 13 now. So we'll see what he's got in these last 7 minutes and 47 seconds of this free practice 2 session. Everybody out there who was out there on the medium compounded tyre, so getting into a little bit more longer run simulation now to see what these mediums can do. Piastri out there at the moment, he was doing slightly longer runs, just well, 7th fastest at the moment, about 0.8 of a second off, but a lot of big things expected from McLaren and Piastri after what a brilliant rate of development they had last year. And of course, Piastri got his first points here last year, survived the melee that was the 3 red flagged Australian Grand Prix of 2023. And of course, a Melbourne resident. This was the park that he grew up playing in. That must be such a bizarre feeling when suddenly the place you grew up in is now the place where you're racing a Formula One car in.
It is kind of bizarre. Great story, isn't it? I mean, I guess Charles Leclerc has a similar thing in Monaco, growing up around the streets of that famous circuit. It must be a wonderful feeling, not only to sort of, it's like playing for your country in another sport, isn't it? But playing for your country or for your favourite team, driving behind the wheel of one of these amazing cars on the streets where you grew up, must be quite a special moment.
A really special moment. Not so special for Leclerc, who has a moment in turn one, has to bail out of it and cuts across the grass. But I'll tell you what, we can actually hear what a special moment it is for Oscar Piastri. Here he is.
Yeah, definitely a special race for me, and I think, I mean, for any driver, a home race is always good fun and a privilege, but like you said, for me, it's about 10-15 minutes away from where I grew up, so well and truly a home race, and excited to be back.
Now, there is a bit of a curse, apparently, on Australian drivers in their home race, because hasn't been an Australian driver that's been on the podium ever. Daniel Ricciardo obviously disqualified in 2014. A lot of people say, well, Mark Webber did stand on the podium, and that is true, but he was celebrating fourth with Minardi. It wasn't fourth. It was fourth, actually, wasn't it? I think it was fourth. Somebody will correct me. It was fifth. Was it? Yeah, I knew I got that wrong. But he was on the podium, but wasn't a top three position. Do you believe in curses? That's the crux of the question.
I mean, is that where you were heading with that? No, I don't believe in curses. I tell you what I do believe, and it's not a curse, but you need to have seen something happen in the past to believe it's possible to happen, don't you? So if you're an Australian driver and you're thinking, no one's ever done this before, there's got to be a little part of you that thinks there is something going on, there is a curse, or there's some reason it's not going to happen.
What times are people doing?
Leclerc was 22.8 last lap leading time.
That's something wrong.
Okay, so Hamilton there on the radio asking what times people are doing on the medium tyre, and once hearing Leclerc's time, Hamilton saying something's definitely wrong. Something's wrong for Lance Stroll, who's gone deep in turn 13, well onto the grass, and rejoins. Scrappy session. Rosanna, curses, yay or nay?
Do you know what? I think Oscar Piastri may have been an unlucky charm for Daniel Kvyat. Do you remember in 2015 he was a grid kid for Daniel Kvyat, and Kvyat actually broke down on the way to the grid, so Oscar had to stand in front of an empty grid box. So maybe it's curses all round. Who knows? I do love it when Oscar tells that story because he's so kind of humble about it. But imagine that, 2015 you're a grid kid, and 2023 you drive on your home soil for the first time as an F1 driver, and here you are again now in your second year of Formula One with people talking about you, perhaps even troubling a podium at your home race. Awesome stuff. What a tale.
Yeah, qualified 16th last year, but survived the race to finish 8th and get his first points on the board. So let's see what Piastri can do. Hopefully a better qualifying for him is in the works. Currently 7th fastest, 8/10 off, and he's just come into the pits. His teammate Lando Norris is 9th fastest at the moment. Perez down in 8th as well. So those early soft lap running, you mentioned it at the time, not particularly a stellar lap from Perez.
No, as you just said there, scrappy all the way through. I mean, I wonder, just listen to those messages from Lewis Hamilton where he asked for the lap times, heard what Leclerc was doing, and clearly didn't like the answer, suggesting there's something wrong with his own car. How frustrating is that for someone like Lewis, who went through years of dominance in this sport, winning championships, got to that number 7, almost got to number 8, cruelly had it taken away from him in 2021, and since then just hasn't been able to come anywhere near that kind of opportunity. I mean, he's leaving the team, going to Ferrari. He's looking at his own future teammate Charles Leclerc with a lap time that tops the table and thinking, my car is a world away from that. I mean, has he just made the right decision at the right time?
Well, he's done it before. He could do it again. Rosanna.
Yeah, I'm just watching Lewis Hamilton in the garage at Mercedes, and we heard him complaining on the radio, didn't he, that perhaps something was wrong. But you then expect the mechanics to dive onto the car, under the car, to check what was going on. But there's not really been much action, which, apart from a mechanic putting some tape on the sort of eyebrows over the tyre, there's not much going on. So you sort of think it must be that setup change that they made in the brake that he doesn't like. So it's perhaps something they have to work on overnight here in Melbourne to make it better for him for FP3 tomorrow for the rest of the race weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly a lot of work to be done overnight, I think, not only for Hamilton and Mercedes, but for a lot of drivers up and down the field. Really interesting Friday so far. Hard to get a full gauge, but actually just seeing how hard they're having to work just to keep the car on the black stuff, keep it pointing in a straight line. This is the scrappiest practice day I've seen in a long time.
It is, and actually, you know, between sessions and certainly during sessions, there's only so much really that you can change. You know, you can make little adjustments to things like ride heights, you can change spring settings, these kind of things, tyre pressures. They're small tweaks. We're not talking about major changes during the session. Any of those things that have to come. Here's Carlos Sainz.
Yeah, get out of the way. Thank you.
That was Carlos Sainz coming up against another back marker. Actually, this has been an issue even in the practice session. Just imagine what happens when we get into qualifying, when there's 20 cars all fighting for the same bit of track, looking for a little bit of space.
What is he doing? Look at this. My God.
Verstappen coming across the same thing with an Aston Martin in front of him. So traffic's definitely going to be an issue, particularly in the first part of qualifying. But yeah, overnight on Friday, to finish what I was saying, overnight on Friday is really the big part where you've managed to debrief the session fully. You've managed to go through the data in real depth. You've got people back at your factory, back in the UK or wherever you're based, running through simulations. All sorts of things are happening overnight, which can mean that you can turn up on Saturday with actually a reasonably different car, hopefully one that solves all the problems you might have had on Friday. So this picture we're seeing right now, absolutely not the finished picture, not the finished article, and there is still scope for everybody to improve.
Yeah, well, to give us a little bit of an idea as we get towards the end of this session, despite not being in the box with us, the BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson still doing the hard work and figuring out what the long run pecking order might be, with the averages of a few drivers. Perez 22.9, Leclerc 22.9, Sainz 23.1, Russell 23.7, and interestingly Piastri 22.9 as well. So in and about the Perez and Leclerc. So Piastri playing with a McLaren and a Red Bull there. Verstappen 1:24.0, but Verstappen with a delayed start as well to the FP1 running. So the highlight for me is they're sort of Piastri then getting in the mix of it.
That's promising. I imagine, Andrew will confirm this I'm sure, but I imagine with Verstappen, we didn't see him all the way through the session, but I imagine his long run was actually not that long a run, which is probably why some of that data might be skewed. And there's lots of mistakes happening, as we've been saying all the way through, lots of errors on laps that will skew all of that data, all of that long run pace. So a very mixed bag, but yeah, really promising from, as we've been saying, potential home hero Oscar Piastri.
Well, that brings a checkered flag on free practice 2, and Friday practice day is done and dusted. It's Charles Leclerc fastest, a 1:17.2. Over 3.5 tenths clear of Max Verstappen in second, Sainz third, Stroll, Alonso the top 5, Russell, Piastri, Perez, Norris, Tsunoda the top 10, Joe, Ricciardo, Sargent, Bottas, Gasly the top 15, Hülkenberg, Ocon, Hamilton, Magnussen the 19 drivers who took part in this session. No Alex Albon in the Williams after damage from a big crash in FP1. Williams assessing that damage. We hope to see him back in action tomorrow for FP3. Rosanna.
Thank you very much, Harry, and thank you, Mark. So there we have it. Ferrari on top in FP2 with Charles Leclerc leading the way ahead of Max Verstappen, who headed out later than expected, 20 minutes or so into the session. Ferrari came into this weekend saying they were going to be aggressive. Harry, can you see that aggression lasting all weekend long? Is it going to peak tomorrow afternoon, do you think, during qualifying?
Well, I certainly hope so. That'd be great, wouldn't it? I think there is a lot of aggression just simply in making sure you can get a clean and tidy lap around this Albert Park circuit. From everybody, there's lockups, there's slips and slides, and Leclerc looking quick.
It is super scrappy, isn't it? What we've seen so far, the action has been thrilling. A few spills here as well. And Mark, the mechanics must just grimace when they see their drivers skating across the gravel. Lawn mowers, I think that's what the cars have been looking a little bit like today. But some work to be done overnight for sure for quite a lot of the teams up and down the grid.
Yeah, there always is a lot of work on a Friday, but you're right, there's lots of people not quite yet happy. Even the current world champion not quite looking totally comfortable in his car. On a day like today on a circuit like this, where you're seeing mistakes happen everywhere, on a track that absolutely bites, you're right. Everybody in that garage is nervous all the way through every session. Everybody, luckily, getting through unscathed in FP2.
Yeah, the track is super challenging. A temporary surface, of course. It's a bit of a road during the year, and then they shut it for us here in Formula One for the Albert Park circuit to host the Formula One for the weekend. The circuit is tricky and challenging, but the conditions have been challenging. Look, I'm looking up at the sky, beautiful blue sky, clear skies, not a cloud in sight, but it's been the breeze, the gusty, blustery breeze around this circuit that's also been causing havoc, hasn't it? So that's another thing to watch out for, Harry.
Yeah, north-westerly breeze across the...
Oh, there you go.
There you go. There's my best weather radar reading across the Albert Park circuit. And these cars can be quite affected by that wind. We've seen so many snaps coming into turn one in particular. Hamilton, Russell, Leclerc all going to turn in, and then suddenly a big snap, and perhaps that's being affected by the wind, and then having to cut across the grass in turn one. A lot of lawn mowing being done, being kept in good shape, that grass, and the exit of turn one. But look, this is great. This is fantastic. A circuit that bites back, and one that is challenging the drivers to get up to speed with. We have a rough idea of the order, but we're not there yet. We've got another practice session to figure it all out before everyone's chucked into qualifying. I'm looking forward to this weekend now.
Yeah, I agree. They are earning their keep this weekend here at Albert Park Circuit in Melbourne. Mark Priestley and Harry Benjamin have been up in the commentary box talking us through that second practice session. There's more to come this weekend. Of course, we've got the third and final practice session. We'll be live at 1:25. And then, of course, qualifying to set the grid for the Australian Grand Prix will be live at 5 to 5. I know it's keeping you up late, or perhaps waking you up early this weekend, but it'll all be worth it. We'll be here to talk you through everything. Mark Priestley, Harry Benjamin, and myself, Rosanna Tennant, down in the pit lane. Hopefully you'll join us at 1:25 for FP3 tomorrow. Goodbye. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.